the board of directors. You watch Australia. Australia had 3 successful cases where companies who had ransomware incidents and had material loss to their shareholders, and the government of Australia went and took them to court and sued them and sued the board of directors. So the board of directors is liable, right? Cyber insurance companies are saying, like, do we really want to insure board liability when things like that happen and it's negligence, right? So this is happening in all sorts of different parts of the world, these sort of reactions with it, right? So $13 trillion of cost. So maybe we need to rethink stuff. Rethink by looking at the tool sets and way we actually work on cybersecurity, defense, and mechanisms and habits and tools and data available to us. There are mechanisms that we can, there are approaches we can do. So Shadowserver, I'm going to quickly go through who we are, what the public benefit tools we have, and then we can have an ongoing conversation about, you know, how everybody here can access that and companies. So there's like, you know, siblings next to each other. Back, you know, 20 years ago, it was a Cisco Systems project, right, originally, Shadowserver. And they funded Shadowserver for probably about 15 years, you know, full on. Then around 2019, 2020, it needed to like transition, right? It needed to get away from the one vendor funding model and move to other sort of funding models. So now what we have is the Shadowserver Alliance, where you have a whole bunch of different companies and organizations, including, you know, APNIC is one of the organizations that help fund, you know, and keep this, the engine of the public benefit capabilities available to the community. Where Shadowserver focuses on, the core mission statement is to help protect everyone on the internet. Think of this as a digital safety cyber civil defense tool. One of the supporters of Shadowserver, Craig Newmark, he kind of coined the terms. Craig Newmark is Craigslist, right? So people know the Craigslist. So Craig Newmark is the founder of Craigslist. So he's one of the, he's going around and helping nonprofit cyber civil defense organizations. And he goes like, cyber civil defense. And I go like, oh, that's a nice term with it, because that's what it's about. It's the public benefit capability added to the industry. So every single day, what happens, and now that I just came into Shadowserver, you know, from being a user of Shadowserver, now I'm inside Shadowserver this month in February. But it's really interesting because I've been even on the outside and the inside, it's like, okay, what's the next thing we're scanning for? What's the next thing we're detecting? So you get this engine that goes on where the reports and the capability of what you get is there's a constant going on. And because Shadowserver is plugged into threat researchers and vulnerability work and law enforcement work, you know, it's a different set of capabilities and alerts and that help you find out, okay, do I have something wrong with my network? All right. What are we providing? So Shadowserver is, some people say, oh, Shadowserver scans. Yes, Shadowserver scans. But actually the core heart, as I see everything that goes on in Shadowserver, starts with this engine here. The malware binary analysis is one of the biggest malware analysis engines that we have in the industry. All right, a lot of antivirus endpoint protection companies, this is one of the tools they use. Core tool that they use is the binary exchange. Just like we do peering, like inner exchange points, there is peering with binary samples. So if I got 1,000 samples I pick up here in Thailand, and I want to expand out to get malware samples from, you know, Eastern Europe, then I go and say, here's my 1,000 samples I collected in Bangkok today. I send up the Shadowserver. Shadowserver says, here's 1,000 samples you don't have. All right, so then I can run it as a endpoint protection. I can run it through my sandboxes and get my intel and do my sort of work. What Shadowserver then does is they throw it through its sandboxes, in malware repository. It pulls out domain names and says, here's domain names that are being used in malware, and then it becomes part of the reporting system. So that becomes like a heart. Then companies give, hey, Shadowserver, can you sinkhole this? Law enforcement comes in, hey, we're doing a takedown operation. Can you sinkhole this? And that data is collected and is part of the reporting that goes out, right? So we haven't got the scanning yet. Then you get vulnerability notifications. There's a companies who are in the know. They take like that say, hey, here's a vulnerability. We're going to announce it. Shadowserver, can you scan for this? All right. And Shadowserver will quietly set up the scan, start scanning for it, let the vendor know that, hey, here's what it looks like. Okay. And then it becomes the disclosure time, T0. Okay, we're going to push it up public. Shadowserver comes up with a parallel report. All right. So immediately that day you get a report and says, oh, there's a vulnerability. How many of these devices are on my network? And you get that report right away. Doesn't cost you anything. It's part of the report structure, right? So then you add in there botnet infiltration. Shadowserver works with a lot of researchers, trust groups, things like that get into the botnets over the years. There's a whole big long track record of getting into the botnet, getting into command and control. Once you capture the command and control, get that data. So then you can say, here's all the computers on your network that were talking to that command and control. All right. It's got one of the largest honeynet systems out. So one of the things that Shadowserver does is a honeynet system where you go out there and instead of just waiting for somebody to say, hey, I think it's active exploit, somebody's activating, you would kind of watch and put an alarm, and Shadowserver will announce that everybody says, okay, this report we have of this vulnerability you should be fixing, it's now active. The bad guys are going after it. And there'll be an announcement on the public list that happens. More service providers. Service providers can set up dark IP address space feeds, NetFlow feeds, and all BGP feeds, and those come in. So we got many service providers around the world. Then we get to the scanning, right? Then we get to the V4 and V6 scanning. Shadowserver scans V6. Advanced scans V6 from algorithms to find out what V6 is lit up, all right? So what you would do is you would say, hey, Shadowserver, here's V6. Like you would give John, say, here's the V6 blocks you got. But then what Shadowserver will do is says, okay, here's a V6 block. But then part of the scans, it will look at, okay, here's the V6 SSH opened. Here's a V6 DNS open. Here's a V6 NTP. So it will track which of the V6 is lit up. So when your IP address has a device on it, we call it lit. And then if there's no device on it, it's dark. We don't want to scan for dark. There's too many V6. We'll scan for light. So we're slowly building up a list of all the lit up V6 space and scanning for it, right? Takedown operations of law enforcement, interaction with different anti-spam and anti-phishing operations, malware analysis, right? So all this goes into the report. Every day you get an updated report of, several hundred reports, that let you know that here's things going on. And all this is a public benefit, right? Because you have companies who say, we need this to happen on the internet, right? We need safer internet. So that's part of the alliance. And then we have other organizations, what they do is say, we need a new capability provided. Can you code this? And because it's a nonprofit based out of Europe, nonprofit in the United States, you got the flexibility where organizations keep on, hey, Shadowserver, can you build this? Can you do that? Can we add this? All as a capability for the industry. So that's what makes it different. Example of that is the DDoS API. The anti-DDoS, the DDoS suppression community, we say we needed some more telemetry, some more tools. And so the community worked with Shadowserver and they created this new capability where when a DDoS attack happens, you plug the source details. We don't care about the target, but the source details into the API. And Shadowserver replies back and says, oh, here's all the details of like the different devices attacking you. So instead of getting a list of IP addresses, and you say, this is a reflector, this is a Miko checkbox, this is part of the Mirai botnet, this is a CPE, right? You get that details. And then you go like, okay, I'm in the middle of attack. Now I know more about what's going on. So when you look at something like this, I don't know if people have seen this before. This is a great tool that I use all the time from CERT New Zealand. They created this ransomware kind of like simplified guide to help protect yourself. But when you look at something like this, that report gives you a lot of answers to a lot of the things you need to do ransomware defense. So an organization who's concerned about ransomware hits, you could just take the Shadowserver report. If it's on the list, go fix it. You're minimizing your risk, right? So that's the core thing with it. What's it cost you? Time. It costs you time, right? It's not a CapEx expense, right? So these large community feeds, it includes law enforcement, critical law enforcement. And there's lots of numbers. I know people like to say there's lots of data going through. And the data infrastructure goes through security audits all the time. It's an attacked resource. In other words, it's expected to be attacked. When you're out there and you're disrupting cybercrime doesn't like that. If you disrupt a criminal operation, criminals tend to go after you because you're interfering with their money, right? And so that's the Shadowserver approach with it. So the key thing is if it pops up on a Shadowserver list, the bad guys see it. So anything you get a report on there, if Shadowserver reports to you, the bad guy can also see it. So if you clean it up, you're minimizing the risk, right? So this is kind of like, the approach with this. So the idea is, and this is one of the things we were doing last week in the cyber war defense workshop, is we don't need to have tons and tons of expensive security tools to start out and have the defense, right? What we need to do is have good habits and take the available public benefit resources and use those first. Because what happens, I see way too many times, is companies will buy this security tool and this security tool and this security tool, and nobody's using it. Nobody's looking at it, right? For example, I work with the cyber insurance community. Cyber insurance says you have to have multi-factor authentication. But if you have multi-factor authentication on your network and you're not watching at multi-factor authentication, the usefulness of it is not as good as if you're watching it. You have to watch it because if you get a whole bunch of MFA failures, why are you getting MFA failures? Because somebody's trying to break in, right? Those are alarms you should see with it. Do you have all the different coverage with it, right? So you have to have the tools. So this concept of like every day going into going into your reports and looking at the report and saying, let me go fix something. Let me go fix it every single day. This is not new. My background when I started in cybersecurity work was in the US military back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, how the US military maintains its readiness, right? Any top military maintains their readiness. The first thing you get looked at if somebody comes up and inspects your readiness is what are you doing over your preventive maintenance? Preventive maintenance is something you do every day. You go out there, I had to go out there and I had to do all this preventive maintenance, my radar systems, TACAN systems, radio systems. I'm every day. That's my first thing. I come in there, have coffee, open up what maintenance I need to do. I had to go out there and do it and log it. And every time I did it, I got better. I'm doing technical skills over and over every single day. So if you walk in as an inspector, first thing you do is you look at those logs. What are you doing? Okay, let's find out if you know how to do this. Let's take you out here. Let's do this PMI. Let's see if you are competent, right? And if you're not doing it and you're not able to actually perform the skill, they know that that unit is not ready. That unit is not ready. It's a core lead indicator of understanding how to do it. That is not like buying expensive tools. Expensive tools don't do that. That's just a habit and leadership on there. So instead of trying to solve everything, right? The approach, and this is what we were talking about last week in the workshop, is to focus on just a few things. Because if you have an aspiration to do a lot of things, I have 2 or 3 things I'm going to get done today. I can get 2 or 3 things done today. But if I got a lot of security problems I want to do and I aspire to say, oh, I want to get 10 things done. Guess what? You're not going to get 10 things done today. You'll probably get less. And then if you got even more things you put on your plate, you're not going to get anything done. And this is the equation of where we need to be. So if we want to cut down the risk, why get, all the security tools you want to get and then, use tools that are publicly available. Shadowserver, all the reports that you get published online so you can see it. Each of the public reports, they go in there to tell you exactly how to do with the samples. You get delivery in 2 methods. The old way method, the method I've used for since Shadowserver started doing it when I was running networks, is email reports. So you get an email report for each one of them. You get a little file with it so you can open up and see, here's the things that Shadowserver found on your network. That works fine, but there's a better way of doing it. Now we have APIs, right? So now you can set up APIs and actually pull down the details in the report and you pull it into your scene, you pull it into Grafana, you can pull it into all sorts of nice tools. You can graph it and things like that with it. So it's a nice transformation with it. So This is last week we were teaching the 4DX principle of cybersecurity, right? It's a new technique, but basically it's so years ago, about 10 years ago, I'm in Indonesia. I'm at a mobile company. They don't have a security department. I need a security team. I couldn't afford to get a security team, but we had newly hired college students. So I take two newly hired college students right out of college. They just graduated, come in because they get to work for the company, hire college students. I said, okay, you're going to become security people. Here's what you do. Here's the Shadowserver reports. Pick one report. Okay, now we're going to go out there and hunt. So what did they do? They picked simple network management protocol. Now, this wasn't from a network 10 years ago. This is actually from a network 3 years ago. You can guess what it was at. There was like simple network management protocol open. Now, simple network management protocol should never be exposed on the internet. If it is, you need to fix it. Why do you want SNMP exposed on the internet? Because if you expose SNMP on the internet, you can get all this nice details. So the criminals know, oh, that's a Cisco 4500 L3 switch with that particular version of software. Oh, go over here to Cisco. Oh, that version has this vulnerability. Oh, okay, now I know how to break into that switch. Right? So I would take my two students, right, who are not students, they're newly hired, and say, go out there and say, let's find these. And if you see this, they'll probably telnet is also exposed. Check that too. Okay, why did it get exposed? What happened? Who didn't configure it properly? What's the policy? What's the practice? Let's go out there and see how we can fix it. So let's get it fixed. And let's write, I taught them how to write a policy. Okay, so that took about a week to teach them how to do that. Says, okay, good, next week, pick another report. Let's go hunt, right? And then they find something. They come in, hey, Popberry, something's funky here with this particular server. Okay, let's start hunting. Let's look at the hood. And then we find, Chinese threat actor in my network. And we start an investigation. We find that. 3 weeks later, oh, we found something funky. That's not Chinese. That's American. This is Indonesia. Okay, so the National Security Agency has a tool in my network. Okay, let's get rid of that one. Because I don't need that on my network, right? And this is, so same two college students. They just took the report, had it. We didn't try to fix everything we saw in the beginning. They just said, pick a little bit. By 6 months in, these two kids, not kids to me, I'm older, right? But they're 20-somethings, right? College grads. They're like, arguing with the vendors. They know what they're doing, right? Because they are learning along the way. And of course, using forums like Apricot, like this, I'm plugging them into other security people, right? The idea is you don't want them asking me all the time. You point them to other people and you teach them the skills to go, like we do here, the spirit of Apricot, to like talk to many different people, right? So this is kind of like the essence of it. This is thanks to Akamai. When I got into Akamai, to get an example, because I got this clear when I was in Akamai. Akamai for years, we used email reports. And Akamai, if you know, as an edge company, you have thousands of servers exposed physically to the internet, thousands and thousands of servers. How do you keep those servers to make sure they are in spec? In other words, doing exactly what they should be doing. Because each server, and this is true for like Google, Amazon, everybody at edge servers, they say, here's our custom server, our software, our code, what should be exposed. Is it an SSL port? Is it a web port? Is it a 443? Right? There's a rule there, right? So what Shadowserver did for years is they took the email reports in, run it through a script, and if any of the servers came up with something that should not be there, wait a minute, there's NTP. No server from Akamai should have an NTP port open. There's an NTP port open. Okay, send that particular server into a queue, open up a trouble ticket, have that machine pulled from the internet. So automatically, no human, all scripted. Ticket open, pulled from the internet, alerted, go figure out why this server is out of spec. Right? So that was automated. Right? And then when the APIs came out, they said, oh, good, we could do the same thing via API. Right? And then other departments inside Akamai can start pulling from the API and start using it for other security investigation work. Right? So this is an example with it. Now, this is expanded. There's a tool that was funded out of the European Union, Intel MQ, which is open source. It's designed for CERT teams, SOC teams, any sort of NOC teams, sort of tool with it, and it can be integrated where you take the APIs and pull the Shadowserver data in, but it expands it. So if anybody here at Hertman's open source data set, this is something I'll share within the community. There's a huge list of different data sets you can pull in of security information that is listed on this one GitHub that we put together. But we also got NIST data, right? So there's a whole bunch of sources that this tool can come into. So if you're looking for something to try out, play out, this is an open source tool and you can set it up with Intel NQ, right? We have a dashboard. UK government. Remember, I mentioned Shadowserver gets its funding now through people join the alliance. We also get other organizations who say, hey, can you build something for us? So UK government said to Shadowserver, we need better visualization so people can see. They need pictures, need illustrations, need graphics, need bubble charts, right? Can you do things like this? That's, government people, right? That go, oh yeah. So sure, we do that. So dashboard was created. But then once the first dashboard was created, then other teams came in there and say, hey, can you do, we need to be able to list the CISA. CISA now has these known exploitable vulnerability list. And the United States now has a rule for all government companies and government linked companies that you cannot have a vulnerability that's on the KEV list. Okay, so what are the things on the KEV list? There you go. Right. So you have this tool where it says, here's the vulnerabilities from a scan perspective that's on the KEV list. Right. So you can get do we get a report on KEV that goes to everybody? Yeah.
Something about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what the point Barry's putting across here, we've got so many scans now and source reports that come out. That page that's on the screen there is my go-to because there's so many vulnerabilities, and they would be, very much a priority remediatory decision for you, maybe as a CISO. So we've just got a graphic there of the honeypot hits and the exploit in question that's happening. So I would look at that maybe every week in my job and expect tickets from the constituents that come into me. Which were the most actively exploited CVEs. And I read something last week. And if you are an organization and you're a big ASN operator and you have a lot of prefixes being announced and you have a lot of, Barry calls it a sandstorm to get through. There was something first introduced with a guy called Mario Rojas who built Maltego. And it's called CVE Prioritizer. And it's an open source tool on the GitHub. And it blends together the matrices of CVE, EPSS, and the KEV. So threat vulnerability and impact matrix, so monitoring to improve your priority patching when you get those feeds in. So that's kind of my dashboard there in terms of CVE management to find out, our honeypots give that situational awareness really in terms of what's been actively attacked that should be really your priority to patch. Cheers, Barry.
So you get another theme in there. So you notice it's Shadowserver data sets. We have an open source tool, Intel NQ. We have Maltego, right? So notice we're not spending money here, except for resources. Oh, here's a server. Here's a cloud resource, right? Here's time, right? That's kind of like the theme with it. So the known exploitability list, that part there. So in summary, and we get to the Q&A, you can jump around and answer questions with it. All the daily reports, is a public benefit, available. Shadowserver works hard to first trying to get people connect to it, and then two, help people actually leverage it, get the most out of it. So that's kind of like a theme in 2024 to help organizations get the leverage out of it, get the most out of it. And these reports delivered email API. And then the other thing that is not well known at all is that Shadowserver has this thing called an MSSP. Shadowserver doesn't have people who can help you, like there's none of people to go and say, I'll help you fix your network. I can get the data so you can fix your network. But what we do is we have a system where a commercial company, right, can say that, okay, John's my customer. And then John Side signs up to Shadowserver, right? So he gets a Shadowserver data. And then John can authorize Shadowserver. So me as a commercial company, I can actually pull down with the API and get what Shadowserver sees on John's network, right? Because my job as a commercial entity is help John secure his network. So I'm getting paid as a commercial company to help secure his network. He's paying me. Now I get the Shadowserver data. Now I got additional data, so now I can give John a richer tool to say, okay, let's go out there and get these fixed, right? So the MSSP program is designed where, to help get more people working on cleaning up the problem. Now, one comment on Shadowserver's data policy. The only organizations who get access to the data on your network is you as a network owner. So when John gets a request in, because he processes a request, when he gets a request in, he does a lot of checking to figure out, are you authorized, right? And if you're not authorized, then he goes, okay, we asked lots of questions with it. Shadowserver has always been very particular on that. It's particular on that because of the work with the law enforcement investigators and that privacy. So when we have companies that say, hey, I'll fund you, but you're going to give me access to all your data, we say, no, thank you. Right. That's there's so many times where Shadowserver says, nope, that's not the way it works. Okay. The only exception to that is if you're a national CSIRT. In other words, you're a government organization whose job is to protect a national constituent. And then you can get reports on like the country. And then they would work with the country. But then again, they are authorized to do that and they're checked with that. So you get Shadowserver working with all the different national CSIRTs to build out that capability capacity. So there's a quick brief on this. Now we can do the rest of the time for Q&A, questions people have, thoughts people have. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
He's running
I'm
off.
gonna sing. Silvia Cadena, Ipinic Foundation, very happy to support, I have to say. But question, if there are individuals that are being, trained in the Asia Pacific region and receiving support to increase their cybersecurity expertise and awareness from different, parts of the region, has Shadowserver offered any opportunities, for example, to provide mentorship or, some sort of accompaniment so that they gain a little bit of confidence on, like what you did with the two kids that we're doing, but kind of like
Right.
200, so, or not? What do you suggest people that are interested to venture into this to get involved?
Those are, because it's a nonprofit, like for instance, I'm here by Shadowserver because the UK government did a grant to Shadowserver to say, okay, send like John and I out here to come into the Asia Pacific region to work on capacity building. And that the 2023-2024 was work with Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia, right? So organization can say, hey, Shadowserver, can you, because there are people sitting around that work with Shadowserver for years and say, hey, come on board, let's get more of our peers up to speed using the tools. And that's a grant model. And so one of the things that I know me inside Shadowserver is doing, I'm going to be writing a lot more grants and knocking on a lot more doors to build up that capability capacity with a model that is very actionable. In other words, because I've got with me, it's like practice over, 15 years of using Shadowserver, these daily reports of being able to like really lock down my network, right? And then buy the extra tools and then okay, I get all this done. Okay, then let's look at the data from my NetFlow, right? And then look at other tools, right? So, it's, but doing the commercial, getting the value out of commercial tools, I found my personal experience, you get more out of it if you got these habits with the basics that are not costing an arm and a leg, right? And we start with that capacity building with it. And with countries around here, a lot of countries don't have the money to buy the security tools. So you start with this. Yeah. Thanks for the question. That's a good one. So
I've got a question. I don't know who subscribes here to us, but for 7 years, I've kind of really wanted feedback of are our reports rich in content? Do you use them? Have you got any good news stories for us where you've had those holes in the network and you've plugged them and, you know, it prevented there was a cost benefit? And we find that really hard to get because you're all busy network and security engineers, your incident handlers. So it was just, I wanted to really come here today and get some feedback if anybody's got that, you know, and if you haven't, then, you know, maybe that's one to consider. Should you subscribe to us in the future?
Yeah.
Barry, a lot of people want to know how to sign up. You didn't mention it yet.
Sign up. How do we sign up? Okay, so how do we sign up real quick? You go to the site over here, just go to the website. It says, you know, subscribe, you'll be signed up. And then it's going to ask you who you are, things like that, what your network is, right? Here's ASN, CyberBlock, block, domain name, right? If you're national cert. And this will be kind of like a correspondence to check things out. John's going to check out the whole parameters to make sure that, oh, here's an IP address. And wait a minute, it's not this autonomous system, or it's not part of the registry. So look at all the tools to make sure that you are who you say you are. So the form looks something like this. You know, that's the subscriber form. So you kind of fill it in, goes in, opens up a ticket. John gets a ticket, looks and processes it. Sometimes he may ask questions to say, hey, anybody know these people? Right? That sort of thing that happens with it. Again, the only people who get information on your network are you, because it's your network, right? That's a you know, data integrity. Inside the tool, right, that we use inside Shadowserver, there are different types of reports. You can have, if you have a big organization, you can get many different types of reports. This team, InfoSec needs this, and the backbone people needs this, as an example, right? So you just correspond with Shadowserver, says, hey, can we get this data over here and this data over here? This could, you know, you work with us. There are three major ones. There are different types of report types, but the three major ones is one is ASN. So Shadowserver says, here's ASN, here's all the IP blocks in the ASN, V4, V6, right? So you can just put the ASN. If you have IP addresses, V4, V6, that are like on the cloud or other things like that, you can add those in that space. And then you can add all your different domains, right? Because domains are important, right? I'll give a little story of use case with, you know, when I was at Juniper, of how these are usable. And then in the report types, you will put like, you know, we'll have a best common practice recommendation, which is basically instead of putting your personal email, you put like an internal alias for your company. And then you have people inside your company sign up to the internal alias. It's easier to kind of manage that way, because that way, if somebody leaves the company, then you can manage who has, you know, who's getting this data, because it's, you know, confidential data. And you got the ASN filters, and then, you know, which reports by default we send most of the reports. There are some other special reports that you just ask the team, and you'll find out from talking back and forth with it. And then there's a lot of tracking the data. So for instance, once a quarter, we send out an additional report that says, here's how many events you're getting, here's some graphics, and we're looking at enhancing this and make it easier so you can see how much stuff is out there on the network. And then there was the API keys plural, right? So how many keys you need, we can get you the API keys. Because you can say, oh, I need an API key for my Maltego, and I need an API key for my, I'll point out Doug, for the Kentech. I need an API key for the, you know, for my personal sort of tool, right? You have multiple keys, right? So you just say, I need a key. And then, you know, those are updated. And you notice over here with the usage, we kind of can see if you're using the key, right? You know, and if the key is not being used, and in the quarterly reports will say, do you really need the key, right? Nobody's using it. Well, we did it for a test. We don't need it anymore. Okay. Get rid of the key. It's not being used. Best common practice, clear up the key. Some countries are doing really good. I left this in because I did a presentation in New Zealand, right? So New Zealand's got a really good high rate of like 61% of the IP address space is actually behind a Shadowserver report of people watching it. So you got some interesting, we track country level sort of stuff. So like, create a internal alias. Here's another thing you run into is how do you get support for people using it? So one of the things I started this in Juniper, where I had a Shadowserver champions at juniper.net, right? And then people inside the company who are using the reports in different departments, they would sign up to this internal alias. And then it made it easy for Shadowserver to correspond with Juniper because it's going to not one overall person, you got a team internally, right? So that was a, practice technique with it. So, for instance, breaking out the reports, you can have the infrastructure team, the cloud space team, the team protecting, different parts of the company, right? Protecting it with it. So, thanks. Good question on that. Another question? Yes.
Yeah, just a quick comment and one question. I'm Adli Baru from APNIC. When John asked about the success stories, we do a lot of engagement with newly established certs, especially in developing economies, including the Pacific. When the certs are being established, one of the things that we encourage them to do is subscribe to Shadowserver data, because when they are new, they don't get any incident reports.
Right.
So anything that they get from Shadowserver will allow them to preempt, to talk to the constituents. Hey, by the way, we saw a server that might be vulnerable. And they're like, who are you? We're the new cert. We will help you. So there's a lot of those. Maybe they don't tell you the stories, but we see a lot of those success stories. Maybe it's hard to track, but the data sets from Shadowserver is very, very useful for a lot of the newly developed cert. Question that I have is, what's the take-up rate from this region? Like, is there a lot of Asian telecom operators, network operators who are subscribing from you in addition to the cert? I know the national certs are all covered.
The national certs are covered. So part of the UK funding is to have maintain a close relationship with the national cert, educate them on the use of our feeds, have one-to-one sessions. One of the deliverables we're working on for that project is ASN operator outreach. So we want to cover all the space from Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand. It's tough. We've got some big ASN operators on board. For example, we've got True Internet from Thailand on board. Very, very proactive. You'll have, a cross spread of different organizations. You might have some industry, you'll have some academic ASN operators as well. But in terms of the take-up, it's there's a lot more work to do. We found when we outreach, if we are emailing constituents, our comms get lost in the noise. So this has been a bit of a revelation for me, really, coming here with Barry, because we've never had so many sign-ups, because you have that face-to-face relationship. So obviously it's good if you have a travel budget in one of these projects, because you can come out here. It's so crucial. National cert subscribe, but if you do subscribe as an ASN operator, you can steal a march on the dissemination of the cyber threat intel. You're probably going to get it quicker. You can pass that, put it in your own back end like Akamai did. So there's a lot of ASN still to get. And my question would be, well, my ask is, if anybody is in a position to network, such as yourself, Abby, really, and because of the conferences you go to, if True Internet, as I know you're doing, we're speaking to your partner ISPs in Thailand, that kind of is the first move in Spain. The big ASN operator in the country subscribes, and it's a domino effect then for everybody else. We can't do that sitting behind the desk at home, really, so yeah, small percentage of ASN space at the moment, but small steps. We're going to be doing this for about 9 months in this impact region, so plenty of time yet.
Thank you.
It will accelerate. So Shadowserver, the team in Shadowserver is a whole bunch of data geeks collecting data, scripting, things like that. Law enforcement, ex-law enforcement. And you got somebody who's a federal prosecutor in the United States, right? So you got like, Dave Watson, who's like HoneyNet Project, right? I think me coming in on the missing element because I know ISPs, exchange points, domain name system, it's a different realm, right? And then how do we work with that realm? Give a story, right? So I'm at Juniper Networks. I've got my Shadowserver report. This is, before APIs. And I come in every morning, I check my Shadowserver report. We've been making sure everything's clean. And I got all of a sudden, boom, I got a malware report on MedRoot. In other words, what malware repository? So it's saying that there are 19 computers inside my network at Juniper Network that have MedRoot. Now, MedRoot is an old boot sector virus that once it gets on the boot sector, you basically get it off your network as fast as possible because there's lateral movement, because it allows the bad guy to get in, lateral movement, and you can't get it off the boot sector. Antivirus can't fix it. You basically take the disk out and throw it away. So immediately I call my InfoSec guy, quick, get those computers off the network. So we pull off. That's saved because no lateral movement happened because we're looking at it. It's okay. Because immediately we pulled off and because they were infected the day before, right? So it was 1 day turnaround. It was like scanned it, there's a report, boom. Then when we did the inspection of it, we put them in the forensics, kind of looking at what's going on. We found out that the MedRoot got into the computers that were fully patched, up-to-date semantic antivirus. 5 of my guys who actually were on my security team were as threat investigators, including Barnaby Jack. People know Barnaby Jack's name. Barnaby was one of the computers on there, had extra tools in Firefox to protect what they're doing in the morning. They're having coffee and they're reading the news off of Microsoft News. So we traced it down. We found out it was using NetFlow. I love NetFlow. We took our NetFlow data, started figuring out what's the flow data, how did they get in? So we're looking at the flows that we recorded, and it was a malvertisement. So in other words, there was an advertisement that had malware and pointer in there, and it was 0 day came in. So then we looked at the domain name, and that domain name was in the spam house blacklist for 2.5 months. So 2.5 months, it was identified, this is a bad domain. You should not send anything to this domain. Now, at that time, I went like, I need a technology that a company back in 2005 created, which is using the DNS resolver as a security tool. So I call up Cricket Lou, Infoblox, and say, Cricket, I need this tool. He comes back and says, can't do it. It's patented. So I was complaining to Paul Bixby and saying, like, we need a tool to do this. We need to turn the DNS resolver into a security tool. He says, yes, we need to do this. Because he was working with Dave Dagan at Georgia Tech on all the things you can do to actually protect yourself. And that was the birth of DNSRPZ. Malware, Shadowserver, talking to the community, we evolve, we come up with a new tool. So that's a use case that I talk over. That's how protective DNS was created, because it was at that point. Because if I had protected DNS at the time, I wouldn't have had $380,000. We couldn't hit the $500,000 threshold to have insurance pay for it. So it was a cost to the company. When we did all the forensic work on those 19 computers to actually go through to make sure that we didn't have bad guys inside the network, that sort of thing. So if I had protected DNS, would have saved $300,000. So there's another hint. Use protected DNS on your network. That's another talk. Other thoughts, questions? So I think that's good. I think we can shut down the broadcast and then people can talk off to the side. And if people want a copy of the slides, you just let me know. These slides are available. You can get the Google slide version, so if you want to cut and paste slides and use it and things like that, we're okay with it. Remember, this is part of like getting the word out about Shadowserver. Thank you.